President-elect Biden this morning, and we both made very clear our strong commitment to strengthening our alliance, which will celebrate 70 years next year. This is a relationship that he understands very deeply based on his broad experience over a long period of time in the United States and his engagement, of course, as Vice President and his many other roles. And I also had the opportunity to personally extend that invitation for him and Dr. Biden to join us next year as part of the celebration of those the 70th anniversary of the ANZUS relationship. Something we both reflected upon was first entered into by a Liberal Prime Minister and a Democratic President. So this is a relationship, as I said on the weekend, that has been stewarded by many Prime Ministers, by many Presidents, from many perspectives. But what has also always remained very, very clear and very true, and was evidenced in the discussion we had today, that it is one that is bigger than both of us and important to all of us, not just here in Australia and in the United States, but in our own region and more broadly around the rest of the world. And we understand those responsibilities. We agreed that there was no more critical time for both this alliance between ourselves and the United States, but more broadly the working together, especially of like-minded countries and the values that we hold and share, working together to promote peace and stability, of course, in the Indo-Pacific region, and more broadly through the many multilateral institutions and agencies that exist, whether they be on trade, the United Nations or others. The Quad, the G7, the OECD, the G20, these also very important in the forums that we work together within the United States and of course here in Australia. Of course we respect the transition process that is underway, at least informally. When that formally commences, that's of course a matter for the US administration, and we will continue to work closely with the US administration respecting those protocols in the months ahead, because there remain many issues on hand that we are dealing with the United States administration. We also discussed the many global challenges, of course, whether they be COVID-19, which is very much clearly top of his agenda in addressing the situation there, as well, of course, the economic impacts of that. The President-elect was very interested in Australia's success here and what Australia could contribute from our lessons and our learnings and the way we've managed the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic dimensions of that as well. We discussed, as I already indicated, security and the environmental challenges that Australia and the United States can work together on, particularly in the areas of those emissions-reducing technologies. I can also advise today that next week I will travel to Tokyo and I will meet with the new Prime Minister of Japan, Prime Minister Suga, and I'm honoured to be the first foreign leader to visit Japan to meet the new Prime Minister following his appointment. I will also be visiting Port Moresby on the return to Australia. Our relationship with Japan over the past few years has really gone from strength to strength. They are an important partner on so many issues within our region. We are special strategic partners. We work closely together on trade, security, defence, as the Minister knows, technology issues, and indeed our present involvement in the Malabar exercise is a very good demonstration of that. We'll play an important role in our economic recovery from COVID-19 and discuss many of ways we can further deepen our trade ties. That's worth some $86 billion, including the Japan-Australia Economic Partnership Agreement. And on the return, as I said, I'll be meeting with my very dear friend, Prime Minister Marape, as we will continue to discuss the work we're doing together to support them on COVID-19, and in particular how we can assist them through our vaccine program and the many other partnerships we have in place with them to address their challenges in dealing not only with the COVID-19 pandemic, but of course the economic recession that flows from that. Now, I'll be strictly following, as you'd expect, the health advice and quarantine requirements. When I return to Australia, I will go into isolation for 14 days, as well as those who are accompanying me, and what will be a first, I anticipate, for the Australian Parliament, joining question time by video link. So that will be a first. And I can only look forward to that, as I'm sure all of you will also. But to the also and very serious and significant matters that draws us to this press conference today, and I appreciate your patience, but I'm going to call on it again. As Prime Minister, and I know the Minister for Defence joins me in this, all members of our government, all members of our parliament, I am so extremely thankful to every Australian who chooses to put on our uniform, to serve under our flag, to protect our freedoms, to uphold our values and to protect our interests. That is a choice Australians make to serve. I respect that choice and I am deeply grateful for it and their service. Our Defence Forces have a proud history, one we remembered again yesterday. Our serving men and women are deserving of the respect and admiration in which they are held by the Australian people, and not just here, but our allies and partners around the world. They've earned it, they've demonstrated it. And I can say this because serving men and women and our Defence Forces, both past and present, share the expectations and aspirations of the Australian people for our Defence Forces and how they engage in their conduct. And that means when you have such standards and respect such standards, that from time to time this requires us to deal with honest and brutal truths, where expectations and standards may not have been met. Now, this has been the case regarding some very serious issues that were raised regarding conduct by some members of Australia's Special Operations Task Group in Afghanistan. It is our Australian way to deal with these issues with a deep respect for justice and the rule of law, but also one that seeks to illuminate the truth, but also seek to understand it, because that is what must drive our response. To ensure that indeed justice is truly served, but also in understanding and illuminating the conduct of those who may have acted in ways that do not accord with the high standards expected of our ADF. And those expectations, as I say, are no less held by the serving men and women of our ADF and their veterans, community, past and present. That we not just seek to illuminate that truth, that we understand it. And not for those who are just specifically involved in such conduct, but those who had responsibility for the environment in which those Australians served, the context of that service, the rules and the culture that were relevant in understanding that conduct. All of this is relevant. And if you're serious about illuminating the truth here and dealing with its consequences, then you must take that broader view. And as a government, and I have no doubt, the CDF and the Defence Force will do the same. Such conduct must be held accountable in our justice system by Australians in accordance with our justice system and the Australian rule of law. But responsibility must also be taken by leadership to ensure the lessons are learned and these events are never repeated. So, as is right, the Chief of the Defence Force, General Campbell, in 2016 initiated the Inspector Generals of the ADF to conduct an inquiry at arm's length from the Defence Forces and the government to determine whether there was any substance to the allegations made in relation to the task group. Those inquiries have now been completed as that part of the process, and the CDF is considering findings and will release the details of that next week while the government makes preparations to deal with the release of the report. This will be difficult and hard news for Australians, I can assure you, to hear. Covering conduct over the course of what has been 3 governments over more than a decade. Our responsibility is to ensure now that we deal with this in a way that accords with our Australian standards of justice, that respects the rule of law, that provides the relevant checks and balances through this process, that upholds our values and standards and the respect we have for our defence forces that they have earned and deserve, that we protect the vulnerable, whether serving currently or who are in our veterans community, who have no part in this, who have no involvement here, and who must be assured by all of us as Australians, by ensuring the integrity and robustness of a response and a process that is consistent with the values that they hold and cause them to choose to pull on that uniform. For those in our veterans community for whom this may be a very difficult time, there are supports available. And one of the instructions that the Minister and I and the Minister for Veterans Affairs have given to our agencies is to ensure that those processes are in place to assist them. So today I announce the following response. Given the likely allegations of serious and possibly criminal misconduct, the matters raised in the inquiry must be assessed, investigated, and where allegations are substantiated, prosecuted in court. To undertake this role, the government is establishing the Office of the Special Investigator. The Office of the Special Investigator will address the criminal matters raised in the Inspector General's report, investigate those allegations, gather evidence, and where appropriate, refer briefs to the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions for consideration. There is a significant number of incidents or issues to be investigated further, and that investigation will be inherently complex. The investigation will require cooperation with international agencies and the evaluation of large amounts of material. The Special Investigator will be an eminent person with experience in the criminal justice system and international law. The office will be established within the Department of Home Affairs and staffed with experienced investigators, legal counsel and other support personnel. It will include investigators from the Australian Federal Police and state and territory police forces with the requisite experience and skills. It will leverage the Australian Federal Police investigative capability and powers. The Office of the Special Investigator is expected to be fully stood up next year, if not sooner, and the Office of the Special Investigator will remain in place for as long as is necessary to resolve matters arising from the Inspector General's inquiry. Establishing the Office of the Special Investigator will enable the Australian Federal Police also to remain focused on keeping Australians safe and secure through its primary focus on fighting serious organised crime, terrorist and foreign interference. This will be a non-statutory body, so there is no requirement for legislation to put this in place. They will act in effect under the powers of the Federal Police Commissioner. But there is another task beyond the justice task, and I'll ask the Minister to speak to that in just a moment. The government will also establish a separate and independent oversight panel comprising 3 eminent Australians whose expertise and experience will provide oversight and assurance relating to defence response to the inquiry relating to cultural, organisational and leadership change. The oversight panel will report directly to the Minister of Defence on the implementation of the inquiry's recommendations and their consideration of any wider implications and actions in response to the inquiry. And I thank the Minister for her recommendation of the establishment of this oversight panel, which will enable her also to ensure that the matters that require to be addressed within the ADF are in fact being done so, and while at the same time preserving the integrity of the justice process that we have set in place and keeps government ministers directly at arm's length from both of those processes. The oversight panel will be comprised of Dr Vivian Tomeo, a former Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, Robert Cornelio, a former Secretary of the Attorney General's Department, and Professor Rufus Black, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Tasmania and a noted ethicist. Ultimately, the oversight panel will be the government's and the public's. independent body to ensure that Defence is making the changes recommended by the inquiry to help ensure we can address any underlying issues. Its role will be an essential part of ensuring ongoing confidence in our Defence Force. I can also advise that the opposition has been briefed on these arrangements today, this morning. They'd also been involved in other briefings leading up to this more broadly on other matters, and I'd invite the Minister of Defence to make some remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister, and good afternoon. It has been widely known that over the past 4 years, the Inspector-General of the Australian Defence Force has been inquiring into the conduct of Australia's Special Operations Task Group in Afghanistan. In particular, rumours and allegations relating to possible breaches of the law of armed conflict over the period 2005 to 2016. As the Prime Minister has said, in 2016, these matters were referred to the Inspector-General of the ADF by the now CDF, General Angus Campbell. The Afghanistan inquiry was conducted at arm's length from both the ADF chain of command and from government. This was to ensure the independence and the integrity of the process. The inquiry was also conducted in private, as it involved matters both of operational security and of potential harm to the reputations of individuals. The Inspector-General has now completed the Afghanistan inquiry. The inquiry report was delivered to the Chief of Defence Force last Friday, and General Campbell has provided me with an initial briefing on the report. He has also advised me that he is now considering the very detailed findings and the many recommendations contained in the report. And can I just say this? The CDF must have the time, the necessary time, to give the report his serious consideration. Once he has gone through this process, he has indicated his intention to speak publicly on the report. And I believe we must provide the CDF with this opportunity. Therefore, at this stage, I will not be making any comment on the substance of the inquiry report itself. The Australian Government is taking all of the necessary steps to ensure that there are the appropriate mechanisms in place to deal with these most serious of matters. In addition to the measure that the Prime Minister has outlined in relation to the inquiry, I've established the Afghanistan, it's called the Afghanistan Inquiry Implementation Oversight Panel. This panel will provide oversight of the defence response to the inquiry. It will also provide assurance to the government and to me as Minister, and also to all Australians, that this report is being implemented as all Australians would expect it to be. Accountability will be the cornerstone of Defence's response to this inquiry. And the Oversight Panel will report directly to me on Defence's implementation of the inquiry recommendations. But importantly, it will also consider and also report on any wider implications and actions in response to the inquiry findings. As the PM has said, I've appointed 3 eminent Australians to this oversight panel, and between them they have all of the requisite expertise and experience in complex and sensitive legal matters, in forensic review, in organisational scrutiny and reform, in ethics and in policy development. And to lead the panel, Dr Vivian Tom AM will be leading that panel of work. The terms of reference for the inquiry itself have been released and will be publicly available today. Can I say I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that this is likely to be a very difficult and a very distressing time for those impacted by this report, particularly so for those who are vulnerable and those who are at risk. This government is absolutely committed to ensuring that current and former serving ADF members, and of course their family members, any of them who are impacted by this inquiry, have access to the right support. This includes a very comprehensive package of legal, psychological, medical, pastoral care and social work support. And I strongly encourage all current and former serving ADF members and their families to please reach out and seek the support that you need. These are extremely serious matters, and the measures that the Prime Minister and I have outlined today means that this government is taking all of the necessary steps to ensure that these matters are addressed and that they are comprehensively and very transparently implemented. So thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Minister. Can I also thank the Minister for Home Affairs and the Attorney-General for their assistance? Phil.
We've had a 4-year inquiry, now we're going to have an investigation into the findings. How long, sort of realistically, till we may see a prosecution, and is there any statute of limitations that would apply to any potential offences in terms of the time they've committed?
I think the first point for me to make, Phil, is this is a continuation of a process, not a new process. As would occur in any such report, it would in ordinary practice be handed on to the AFP to prepare a brief of evidence to make available to the DPP. Now, in this case, this is no normal set of circumstances, and the expertise scale of this that is necessary to properly fulfil that function that the AFP would normally provide here does not exist. And as the Minister for Home Affairs has submitted through this process, would significantly overwhelm the AFP and then many other very important work that they have to do. So it's necessary to build that capability. It sits under the AFP's commission and continues that process. So I wouldn't want there to be a perception, and I know you're not suggesting this, that this is some new investigation. The report does not provide a brief of evidence. That was not necessarily its purpose. And so this is the next step. And it will go for an indeterminate amount of time. A key task of the special investigator will really be to triage, I think, the many issues that are raised in the report. Now, I can assure you neither the Minister or I are privy to the unredacted version of this report when it comes to the names and identification of individuals. That is important, I think, for the separation of our roles from this process and the integrity of that process. But Phil, the short answer is it is an indeterminate period of time, and it'll take as long as it takes to progress through what will be very complicated legal issues. And so we must prepare ourselves for what will continue to be a long and arduous journey. Chris?
Statute of limitations, Pam?
Look, I will come back to you on that specifically, but to the extent that anything, we will have to abide by the normal laws that sit around those matters unless the Minister has anything to add to that.
No, it'll be subject to, given it's such a wide period of time, that will be one of the things the Special Investigator will take into consideration.
Yeah. Prime Minister, are you shocked by when you said that the process would be Australian justice? Does that mitigate against the possibility that some of our soldiers could be called before the International Criminal Court?
We believe so, yes, and that's the important advice we've taken on this. We need to deal with this as Australians, according to our own laws, through our own justice processes, and we will. And I think that will say a lot about Australia. Of course, this report will be difficult news, and all of our partners must be assured, and those around the world who rightly hold the Australian Defence Forces in high regard, I believe by the process we're outlining to you today shows why that is the case. That in Australia we deal with this stuff, and we deal with it honestly, but in accordance with the rule of law and by following the justice practices and principles that makes Australia what it is.
Prime Minister, are there any concerns within government that any of the evidence that's been collated may not be admissible given the nature in which it was compelled from witnesses? And are you confident that the current Chief of Defence and Chief of Army have declared any potential conflicts of interest given their time that's covered in this report?
Well, the short answers to both questions are yes and yes. I mean, there is evidence that is contained in the report that obviously has been gathered under different circumstances, and those are the very reasons why a special investigator working under the AFP's powers must be appointed to resolve those issues. And that's why it's not a simple matter of just taking this report and then dropping it down to the DPP. That's not possible. And so that's what I mean when I refer to the very complex issues that have to be addressed here by this special investigator, and indeed the Director General that sits above that and makes sure the entire operation runs. And I'll ask the Minister to comment also more specifically on the CDF, but that I am I am confident about that, and I would expect that if there are any issues that arose, that they would be raised directly and immediately with me or the Minister.
Well, look, thank you, Prime Minister. I share the Prime Minister's confidence in the CDF and Defence's senior leadership. But one of the reasons why I did recommend, and we are now establishing the oversight panel, is to ensure that any matters that relate to culture and any matters that might be found in the report or, as I've said, emerge during the course of the implementation are considered not only by the CDF but also considered externally. So that is exactly the purpose, so that we have accountability and transparency that sits out of the ADF chain of command and outside of government.
Prime Minister, just on cultural issues, are you willing to have senior leaders in the ADF sacked over, or if it emerges that they looked the other way or knew about what was going on and just allowed it to flourish?
Well, as I said in my opening remarks, it's not just the specific conduct of individuals that relate to acts that are covered in this report. It is the environment, it is the context, it is the rules, it is the culture and the command that sat around those things. And if we want to deal with the truth of this, we have to deal with the truth of that. And I know there'd be some concern in the veterans community, and I know there would be some concern within those serving members of the ADF, that this process may only just focus on those specifically involved. And I want to assure them that both the CDF, the Minister and myself are very, very keen to ensure, to really understand and learn from this, then those matters can't be ignored. And they need to be understood and they need to be addressed. Now, when it comes to who is serving and where they're serving, well, that is a matter for the CDF, and that is a matter that ultimately is then oversighted by the panel led by Vivian Tom that the Minister has appointed. And I think that provides the appropriate check and balance here, I think, in keeping that on the right keel. But I'd add this, and this is what I'm also very keen to stress. There is some disturbing conduct here, but we cannot then take that and apply it to everyone who's pulled on a uniform. And if we did that, that would be grossly unjust. Grossly unjust. And I know that wouldn't be the view of people here or in government or anywhere else. We all share a deep respect for our defence forces, but we also share a deep respect for justice. And it's about managing those two issues to what the high standards I think we place on them in Australia.
Do you have any concerns for the safety and well-being of our serving personnel overseas currently and also embassy staff? And Minister, how often do you expect to be hearing from this oversight panel?
Why don't you deal with that one first, Linda?
Okay. Well, in relation to the oversight panel, I will get an official report every quarter from them, and I will be reporting regularly to the Parliament on their reports to me. If I need more, then I will obviously ask them to do more. So I will be in regular contact with the oversight panel. And can I just stress, nothing will be out of bounds for this inquiry. There are many lessons, no doubt, to be learnt at many levels. And so this inquiry, this panel, will be absolutely looking at all of them.
And just to answer the other part of the question, I don't want to overstate them, but it is an appropriate thing for the government to take appropriate precautions about, and that is why today I am announcing the process, and there is a period of time both for the CDF to continue to consider the report himself, but we've also been engaged and begun the process with state and territory governments as well as ensuring the Department of Veterans Affairs and the many services that they support are in a position to deal with the response when it is the report when it's released next week.
How many soldiers are there accusations against? When you talk about it doesn't involve all members of the ADF, can we get a sense of that? Are you shocked by what you see in the report? And just in relation to the Joe Biden phone call, are you surprised? I'll come back to that.
But I'll try and remember it until we get to that, but yep.
Well, I was just saying, are you surprised Donald Trump hasn't conceded it?
Well, I won't go to those issues. What else, in terms of the other matters that you've raised, I think they're best addressed by the CDF when he releases the report next week, and he can go to those matters. This is his report, and it's for him to release it and speak to its contents. and so I'll allow him to do that. But in terms of what the government has been briefed on, I think you can tell from the seriousness and the gravity in the way we are responding to this that you can get a clear sense of how seriously the government is taking this, Andrew. This is going to be very difficult for Australians. It's going to be very difficult for our serving community and our veterans community. It's going to be difficult for all of us. But what we are seeking to do as a government, and I think what we have to do as a country, is to absorb this in a way that enables us to uphold the integrity of our justice system and uphold the integrity of our defence forces. We rely vitally on both of these institutions, absolutely vitally. Our safety, our security depends upon it. And that is why you are hearing the response from us today as you have heard it. Michelle?
Prime Minister, this has been a matter of debate obviously now for years. What has already been done to improve the culture in the relevant part of the Defence Force? And also there's been some suggestion that maybe it would be a positive move to disband the SAS and reorganise things. Can you rule that out, or do you think that has any merit?
Well, I'll allow the Minister obviously to deal with the progress that has been made there. But I would simply say this, Michelle, this will be a long process. This is the next stage, and I'm not about to preempt or prejudge any actions in any way, shape or form that the CDF would think was appropriate in responding to the report. That's his job. And he knows this. We've worked together for some time. He knows what his job is. We know what our job is, and we expect each other to do both of those. But, Minister?
Look, thank you, Michelle. As I said, this started 4 years ago with a range of rumours and allegations that were circulating within Defence. And so they did start off as rumours and allegations, which is why the now CDF referred this through to the IGADF. 39,000 Australians have served in Afghanistan since 2001, and 26,000 of those in uniform. And they have done so with a few exceptions, which the CDF will address when he delivers his comments publicly and also delivers a version of the report. That this should in no way undermine the work of the vast majority of those 39,000 Australians. They served with great distinction, and 41 Australians lost their lives in that process. Today we have, and as Minister I could not be any prouder of the work that our men and women are doing on Operation Bushfire Assist, COVID Assist. We've got 3,000 of our defence personnel serving overseas at the moment in quite challenging circumstances. But it is important that all Australians retain confidence in the ADF. So for all of the reasons that the Prime Minister has said today, it is critically important that the CDF has time to consider the report, work out what his response to the findings and recommendations will be, and to deliver his implementation report. But since 2016, since these rumours and allegations emerged, there has been a significant and long-standing reform processes in Special Operations Command, and those reforms continue today. And after the CDF has read the findings and the recommendations, I'm certain he will have more to say about what more yet has to be done with our Special Forces Command and their units.
Can I just clarify on the report that's being released next week? What's the level of detail you anticipate being released? Apart from names of individuals, do you accept that in order for the country to move on and grapple with this, that as much detail as possible about the conduct is released?
Well, it's quite a voluminous report, I can assure you of that, but it will be, for obvious reasons, a redacted report, both to ensure the integrity of the justice process that is flowing from it, and also national security issues as are relevant.
Pete, you obviously weren't Prime Minister and the Minister wasn't Minister when the decisions were made about these deployments. But have you had a chance to reflect on lessons that your predecessors as PM and ministers might have had? Did we ask too much of SAS and the commandos in Afghanistan? There's been criticism of the sort of the tempo of operations. Was our political leaders in the past, were they mistaken in sort of maybe contributing to this sort of culture that developed and things like that?
Oh, well, the span of your question, I think, goes in part to some of the issues that will be covered in the report, not from a political point of view, because the matters that are contained in the report were never raised, is my advice with government, with ministers at the political level. That is my understanding, and that has certainly been the case, save for what has been initiated in my time as both a Cabinet Minister and indeed as Prime Minister. But I would say this: anyone we ask to put on a uniform, we're always asking a tremendous amount of them, and particularly those who serve in the most dangerous of situations, and that of course goes to our special operations. And whether that's those who are based over there as part of the Special Air Service Regiment, or indeed the 2 Commando not far from where my electorate is in southern Sydney, we ask an extraordinary amount of them. We always do. And this is why I stand in awe of those who choose to put on a uniform, because they do that knowing that they will be asked to put themselves in very difficult situations, and that's why their service is so extraordinary.
On the special investigation, you said the special investigations would be part of a continuation of the process. Does that mean that AFP investigations that have already been underway for a couple of years will be sort of rolled into the new process? And just a second question.
The short answer to that is I would assume that the AFP would resolve how they would handle those issues within this new structure. Yeah.
And would you be seeking to strip medals from any soldiers who have been found to have committed war crimes?
I'll ask the Minister to comment on that.
In relation to any of the findings and recommendations of in the Inspector General's report, the CDF is considering all of those options. There will be many options and many recommendations for his action, and it would be my expectation that the CDF will consider each and every one of those recommendations, which may well include what you've just said. But again, I'm going to wait until the CDF has finished his deliberations, and there will be many other issues that will emerge that the CDF will have to consider, and also possibly how and when he refers these matters through to the Special Investigator.
The lights are a bit bright. We've got 2 questions up the back, but first, yep.
Prime Minister, there's been some criticism of the time this report has taken 4 years. For these further investigate and the mental health impact that has had on serving and soldiers and veterans, will these further investigations, will there be any timelines or deadlines for them?
Well, my answer is the same as the answer I gave to Phil, and it's an indeterminate time frame. And I'd simply say I can appreciate that frustration and I can appreciate the anxiety, but these are incredibly complex events involving actions and conduct in another country in a war, and that is not a simple process in terms of the evidence gathering arrangements, and there are language difficulties, there are international law issues. This is not a simple matter, and it remains not a simple matter. And so it'll take as long as it needs to take to ensure we deal with our dual objectives here of addressing the justice that is necessary in accordance with our laws and our systems, but also ensuring the integrity of our defence forces on which we all rely.
Did your discussion with Joe Biden include the need to reach net zero emissions by 2050?
No, it didn't. It wasn't raised with me during the course of the call. But we did discuss, I raised with the President-elect the similarity between the President-elect's comments and policies regarding emissions reduction and technologies that were needed to achieve that. And we look forward to working on those issues. But the specific matter that you raise was not addressed in that call.
Minister, are you concerned about the transition of power from Trump to a Biden presidency? Are you concerned about that? And are you also, just following up on Andrew's question, are you surprised he hasn't conceded yet?
Well, in answer to your first question, no, I'm not concerned. And we will respect the processes that the United States have. This is not the first transition from one president to another. It happens from time to time, and those those procedures are well established, and the President-elect and I discussed that this morning, and that we would both have to respect that, and there are matters still on foot that we're working with the current administration on, and we'll continue to do that. So that's quite regular. In relation to the other matter, it's not a matter for Australia. It's not a matter for me to pick up the phone, as others were suggesting I do. Well, it appeared that's what they were doing. That's not a matter for me. That is a matter for the President, and we will just work through patiently the issues we have in Australia's national interest. Brett.
Thanks, PM. Just with the borders still closed, a lot of Australians might be surprised that you're travelling overseas. Why is it important that you're in Japan? What will be the outcome of that trip, and how will Parliament work with you in isolation, assuming here at the Lodge for 2 weeks?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll be one of tens of thousands of Australians who, over the course of this pandemic, have left Australia. This is not unusual. There are many tens of thousands of Australians who have had to travel overseas, including indeed the Minister for Defence and the Minister for Foreign Affairs, regarding their business activities, many others on compassionate reasons, and those figures will be well known to you. And for many, many months now, I've engaged in telephone diplomacy on a large number of matters, and we'll be doing so again this weekend with the ASEAN meetings that will be held over the course of this weekend and the East Asia Summit, and I'll be looking forward to participating in those, engaging with my colleagues in the region there. To be the first national leader, I think, to engage in Japan with the new Prime Minister and to have the opportunity to do that is significant for Australia, because Japan's very special relationship with Australia is not just an economic one. It's not just a trade one. It's not just a cultural and social one. Importantly, it's a strategic one. We form together with the United States and India a very important Quad relationship. We play a very important role together in working in the Southwest Pacific together when it comes to development, and in particular more recently the COVID-19 assistance which is being provided. Issues around vaccine development in Southeast Asia, work that's being done in the Mekong. Japan and Australia are very important together in providing, I think, a like-minded alignment on these strategic issues within our region. And so the opportunity to go there and conclude some very important arrangements in this space is in Australia's national interests. And while I'm there, I'll also have the opportunity to discuss economic issues as well. And importantly, given I will be going in, as you rightly say, 14 days isolation, which I'll do here at the Lodge, then I will be able to also, importantly, visit with Prime Minister Marape. You all know my strong commitment to the relationships within the Pacific, and while I've spoken to all Pacific leaders regularly throughout the course of this crisis, this is an important opportunity to do that face-to-face. Will actually happen to be in Port Moresby the night of the next State of Origin. So I suspect we'll take a moment to watch that game together, as we like to do. It's part of the social element of our relationship. Chris?
Prime Minister, did the President-elect raise the possibility of a summit of democracies, which is something he has been pushing?
No, he didn't. But we did speak about multilateral engagement, and the US is what I believe is their indispensable and important role in those multilateral fora. We did talk about the OECD, for example. We spoke about the G7 Plus, where the UK Prime Minister Johnson has invited me to participate in the G7 summit next year, as we would have been in the United States this year were it not for COVID restrictions, and indeed as we participated when France hosted it last year. So we talked a lot about our involvement in these fora, and in particular the ones that bring together like-minded market-based democracies. And he understands this part of the world extremely well. And so I was very pleased to hear his very strong commitment to not only seeing that continue, but to see it strengthen in the years ahead. So I may finish where we started, and that is he and I will be the next pairing of stewards of this important relationship, of this alliance. We understand the responsibilities of that extend well beyond our terms and our specific domestic responsibilities. This is one of the most important relationships we agreed in the world. And we will be doing everything in our national interest to ensure that it is maintained in good order. Thank you all very much.